The atmosphere inside the executive boardroom at Forrester Creations was thick enough to cut with a knife, suffocating in its intensity and heavy with the unspoken weight of impending doom. For weeks, the tension had been building to a boiling point. Relentless tug-of-war between the ambitious desires of Brooke Logan Forrester and the unyielding, territorial demands of Steffi Forrester Finnegan. The glass table reflected the stoic, hardened faces of the fashion dynasty's elite, but beneath the polished veneer of corporate professionalism, a brutal family civil war was about to reach its devastating climax. Ridge Forrester had summoned an emergency board meeting, a sudden and ominous move that sent shockwaves through the building. The air was electric with anticipation, with everyone present acutely aware that the balance of power in Los Angeles was about to shift irrevocably. Brooke Logan Forrester entered the room with a sense of cautious optimism, her head held high and her heart tethered to the promises her husband had made. She had spent the last several days engaged in meticulous, strategic mastermind sessions with her daughter, Hope Logan Spencer, charting a visionary new path forward for the company. Brooke believed that this meeting was the culmination of her efforts, the moment Ridge would finally validate her lifetime of dedication by officially crowning her as the co-CEO of Forrester Creations. She looked at Ridge with eyes full of profound love and trust, expecting him to stand by her side as an equal partner in both life and business. Beside her, Hope sat with a quiet, fierce determination, ready to witness her mother finally claim the respect and authority she so deeply deserved after years of being sidelined by the Forrester family's internal politics. Across the sprawling boardroom table sat Steffi Forrester Finnegan, her posture rigid and her expression an unreadable mask of defensive defiance. Steffi had drawn a line in the sand, issuing a childish yet highly emotional ultimatum to her father. She demanded that Ridge put her first, that he prove his love for her by protecting her absolute authority over the company. For Steffi, this was never merely about a corporate title. It was a desperate, territorial battle for her father's soul and a crusade to ensure that the Forrester legacy remained untainted by Logan influence. She had flatly refused to step down, wrapping herself in the historical armor of her family name, and now she waited to see if her emotional blackmail had successfully paralyzed the man who sat at the head of the table. Ridge Forrester stood at the precipice of an impossible dilemma, a man visibly torn apart by the warring factions of his own heart. The psychological toll of being caught between the woman he considered his destiny and the daughter who shared his blood was etched deeply into the lines of his face. He had spent sleepless nights agonizing over this choice, knowing that whatever words left his mouth today would irreparably shatter someone he loved. He looked at Brooke, seeing the decades of passion, forgiveness, and partnership they had shared. Then he looked at Steffi, seeing the fierce, unyielding spirit of his mother, Stephanie, staring back at him. The silence in the room stretched into an agonizing eternity before Ridge finally cleared his throat, signaling the beginning of the end. When Ridge finally spoke, his voice was devoid of its usual warmth, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment that immediately sent a chill down Brooke's spine. He did not begin with a preamble of unity or a compromise designed to appease both sides. Instead, Ridge delivered a devastating, surgical strike to Brooke's ambitions. He announced, with a brutal finality, that he would not be supporting Brooke's bid for the co-CEO position. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, but Ridge was not finished. In a move that defied all logic and completely obliterated his previous promises, he declared that he was officially stripping Brooke of all her remaining power and influence at Forrester Creations. The executive authority she had wielded, the respect she had commanded, were being unceremoniously ripped away in front of the entire board. The sheer brutality of the corporate demotion was staggering, but it was Ridge's justification that truly twisted the knife into Brooke's heart. Looking directly at his wife, Ridge declared that moving forward, only those who possessed true Forrester blood were worthy of holding supreme leadership within the company. It was a statement of breathtaking cruelty, a direct and intentional invalidation of Brooke's entire history with the fashion house. Brooke had literally given her blood, sweat, and tears to Forrester Creations. She had created the belief formula that saved the company from financial ruin. She had modeled their most iconic lines, and she had stood by the brand through its darkest hours. To be reduced to a mere outsider, dismissed simply because she did not carry the Forrester genetic code, was an insult of catastrophic proportions. By invoking the sacredness of the Forrester bloodline, Ridge was not just making a business decision. He was resurrecting the ghost of Stephanie Forrester and allowing her exclusionary, elitist rhetoric to echo through the boardroom. For decades, Brooke had fought tooth and nail against Stephanie's relentless campaign to brand her as an unworthy interloper. Ridge had always been her defender, the man who championed her value against his mother's vicious attacks. Now, the love of her life was using those exact same weapons against her, validating every cruel thing Stephanie had ever said. Ridge had officially chosen his mother's legacy and his daughter's ego over his wife's undeniable competence and historical contributions. With this single, earth-shattering decree, Ridge directly elevated Steffi to a position of absolute, unshakable power. Steffi was no longer just a co-CEO. She was the undisputed, supreme monarch of Forrester Creations, answering to no one and shielded completely by her father's bloodline mandate. The transformation in Steffi was immediate and visceral. The rigid defensiveness melted away, replaced by a triumphant, arrogant smirk that she made no effort to conceal. She had won. She had forced her father to choose, and he had chosen her, effectively sacrificing his marriage on the altar of her entitlement. Steffi's sense of vindication radiated through the room, a toxic aura of superiority that signaled the beginning of a terrifying new regime. For Brooke, the immediate physiological and emotional reaction was nothing short of a total collapse. The breath was violently knocked from her lungs, and a deafening ringing filled her ears as the reality of Ridge's betrayal washed over her. She sat frozen, her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto the man she had loved for the better part of her life. This was not a simple disagreement over a marketing strategy or a temporary pause on a fashion line. This was a fundamental, soul-crushing betrayal of her trust, her dignity, and her worth. Brooke realized in that agonizing moment that no matter what she did, no matter how much she sacrificed, she would never be enough to overcome the blinding, irrational loyalty Ridge held for his daughter's tantrums. The boardroom decision was the final, fatal blow to the legendary Bridge marriage. As Brooke stared at Ridge's resolute, unapologetic face, she felt the invisible tethers that had bound their hearts together for decades violently snap. The romance that had survived countless scandals, external manipulations, and tragic misunderstandings could not survive this profound lack of respect. Ridge had looked her in the eye and told her she was inherently lesser because of her last name.
There was no coming back from that.
The marriage did not end with a dramatic confrontation in the rain or a tearful goodbye. It ended in a sterile corporate boardroom, executed by a man who had cowardly chosen the path of least resistance to appease his spoiled daughter. Hope Logan Spencer sat beside her mother, witnessing the entire horrific spectacle unfold in real time. Hope, who had already been pushed to her absolute breaking point by Steffi's condescending leadership and the unjust shelving of the Hope for the Future line, felt a profound paradigm shift within her own psyche. She watched the man who had helped raise her, the man who claimed to love her mother unconditionally, publicly humiliate and destroy Brooke without a second thought. The sweet, optimistic, and forgiving nature that had always defined Hope was instantaneously incinerated, replaced by a cold, hardened realization about the true nature of the Forrester family. This catastrophic betrayal served as the ultimate radicalization of Hope Logan. She realized that playing by the rules, turning the other cheek, and attempting to find common ground with the Forresters was a fool's errand. The Logans would never be granted a seat at the table. They would always be viewed as disposable assets to be discarded the moment a Forrester felt threatened. As Hope looked at Steffi's smug face and Ridge's cowardly posture, a dark, militant desire for retribution began to take root in her soul. She would no longer be the victim of Steffi's corporate bullying. She would become the architect of their downfall. In the immediate aftermath of the meeting, a haunting silence fell over the executive suite as Brooke and Hope retreated to regroup. The initial shock and the stinging tears of heartbreak quickly evaporated, burned away by the rising heat of absolute, unadulterated hatred. Brooke Logan, a woman who had spent her life leading with her heart, felt that heart turn to stone. The profound sorrow of losing her marriage was entirely eclipsed by a burning, venomous rage. Ridge had not just broken her heart, he had insulted her legacy, and Brooke was not a woman who went quietly into the night when her legacy was threatened. Behind closed doors, a terrifying and formidable alliance was forged in the fires of Ridge's betrayal. Brooke and Hope, bonded by their shared trauma and their mutual disgust for the Forrester elite, began to formulate an earth-shattering plot for revenge. They were no longer fighting for a co-CEO title or the reinstatement of a single fashion line. They were fighting for total corporate annihilation. They vowed to dismantle the power structure of Forrester Creations from the inside out, utilizing every secret, every vulnerability, and every ounce of their combined strategic genius to overthrow Ridge and Steffi's tyrannical regime. The battle lines in Los Angeles were now definitively drawn, setting the stage for a corporate and familial war unlike anything the fashion world had ever seen. The news of Brooke's ousting and Steffi's absolute ascension would soon reach Bill Spencer and Katie Logan, sending shockwaves through the rival Logan brand and forcing them to brace for the inevitable fallout. But what Ridge and Steffi failed to realize in their moment of arrogant triumph was that they had not neutralized a threat, they had created a monster. By stripping Brooke of her power and breaking her heart, Ridge had unleashed a brilliant, vengeful force of nature. Brooke and Hope were coming for the throne, and they would not stop until the Forrester empire was brought to its knees. The atmosphere within the sprawling, glass-walled executive offices of Forrester Creations had grown entirely toxic, suffocating the very creativity that the legendary fashion house was built upon. For weeks, the relentless, bitter tug-of-war over the co-CEO position had transformed the sanctuary of high fashion into a brutal corporate battlefield. Brooke Logan Forrester, fueled by a fierce maternal instinct to protect her daughter Hope's marginalized hope for the future line, had launched an aggressive, uncompromising campaign to unseat Steffi Forrester Finnegan. Brooke believed that her historical contributions and her strategic vision entitled her to that seat of ultimate power. On the opposing side, Steffi stood like an impenetrable fortress, her back arched and her claws out, fiercely defending her birthright and her executive authority. Steffi's demands had escalated from professional disagreements to deeply personal, emotional ultimatums, childishly demanding that her father, Ridge Forrester, prove his loyalty by placing her above his wife. Caught in the devastating crossfire of these two fiercely determined women, Ridge found himself completely paralyzed, his soul slowly being crushed under the immense weight of their warring ambitions. The breaking point did not arrive with a dramatic boardroom presentation, but rather in the quiet, suffocating confines of the Forrester mansion during a series of heated, agonizing arguments that tore at the very fabric of Ridge and Brooke's legendary romance. Brooke, blinded by her righteous crusade for corporate equality and her desperate need to validate Hope's life work, pushed Ridge relentlessly. She demanded that he see Steffi's leadership as a tyrannical reign of terror, insisting that the only way to save the company and their family was for Ridge to hand her the reins. But in her relentless pursuit of power, Brooke failed to see the profound psychological toll she was inflicting upon the man she claimed to love. Ridge was not just a CEO, he was a father desperately trying to maintain peace and a husband exhausted by decades of familial warfare. Every demand Brooke made felt like another brick added to the crushing load on his chest. The Logan ambition, which he had once found intoxicating and vibrant, now felt like a bottomless, insatiable void that threatened to consume everything he held dear. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that the peace he so desperately craved would never be found in a home where corporate titles were weaponized as measures of love. Driven by a profound, desperate need for silence and emotional survival, Ridge made a decision that would alter the landscape of both families forever. Without a word to his fiercely ambitious wife, without a parting glance at the towering Forrester Creations building that had become his personal prison, Ridge quietly packed a bag and boarded a private jet in the dead of night. He was not just fleeing Los Angeles, he was fleeing the relentless chaos, the endless ultimatums, and the suffocating demands of the Logan women. As the aircraft pierced the clouds, leaving the glittering, chaotic sprawl of the city far below, Ridge felt a physical release of tension. The destination programmed into the flight computer was not a random escape, but a targeted journey toward the one person who had always represented an oasis of unconditional peace in his turbulent life. He was heading across the globe to the sun-drenched, opulent shores of Monaco, seeking the soothing, unblemished comfort of Taylor Hayes. The contrast between the stifling, tension-filled executive suites of Los Angeles and the breathtaking, liberating beauty of Monaco could not have been more profound. As Ridge stepped off the plane, the warm Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of sea salt and blooming jasmine, instantly washing away the residual grime of corporate warfare. Monaco, with its azure waters dotted with gleaming superyachts and its terraced cliffs bathed in golden sunlight, was a world away from the bitter rivalries of Forrester Creations. It was here, amidst this serene elegance, that Ridge found Taylor. She was the historical anchor to his soul, the woman whose love had never been contingent upon boardroom victories or corporate titles. When their eyes met across a sunlit terrace overlooking the shimmering sea, the years of separation and the countless misunderstandings simply melted away. In Taylor's soft, welcoming gaze, Ridge saw the reflection of the man he desperately wanted to be, a man unburdened by the relentless demands of the Logans. The reunion was not marked by grand, theatrical declarations, but by a quiet, profound vulnerability that Ridge had not allowed himself to express in years. Sitting with Taylor as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, fiery glow over the Mediterranean, Ridge finally confessed the absolute exhaustion that had driven him across the world. He spoke of the suffocating atmosphere back home, his voice heavy with the sorrow of a man who had fought a losing battle for too long. He admitted that he was fundamentally tired of the troubles, the endless scheming, and the insatiable, demanding ambition that Brooke and the Logans brought into the company and his life. He painted a vivid, painful picture of the war between Brooke and Steffi, detailing how Brooke's relentless push for the co-CEO seat had crossed a line from which they could never return. He confessed that the Logan appetite for power had eclipsed their capacity for peace, and that he could no longer allow his daughter, or his own sanity, to be sacrificed on the altar of Brooke's ambition. In that deeply emotional confession, Ridge articulated a realization that had been slowly crystallizing in his mind for months. He recognized that the corporate war over the hope for the future line was merely a symptom of a much deeper, irreconcilable disease. Brooke and Hope would never be satisfied until they controlled the narrative, the company, and ultimately him. The constant fighting, the emotional blackmail, the requirement that he constantly choose between his wife and his children, it had shattered his spirit. Looking into Taylor's empathetic, tear-filled eyes, Ridge realized that he did not want to spend the rest of his life managing the volatile, explosive dynamics of the Logan women. He craved stability. He craved a partner who prioritized their emotional connection over corporate dominance. He craved the family he had built with Taylor, a family that, despite its flaws, was rooted in a fierce, unyielding loyalty that did not require him to constantly prove his worth through business concessions. Moved by a sudden, overwhelming surge of clarity and absolute resolve, Ridge did something that would forever sever his ties to Brooke Logan. Dropping to one knee on that picturesque Monaco terrace, with the sound of the gentle waves providing a timeless soundtrack, Ridge proposed to Taylor Hayes once again. It was not a proposal born of impulsive passion, but one forged in the fires of deep reflection and an agonizing desire for peace. He looked up at the woman who had always been his safe harbor and made a solemn, unbreakable vow. He promised her that if she would have him, they would rebuild their lives together, free from the toxic, overbearing shadow of Brooke Logan. He swore that they would create a stable, united family alongside Steffi and Thomas, a fortress of love and loyalty where the Logans' ambitions could never again penetrate their personal or professional lives. He asked her to be his wife, his partner, and his ultimate sanctuary. Taylor's reaction was a beautiful, heart-wrenching symphony of disbelief, overwhelming joy, and profound vindication. For years, she had watched from the sidelines, nursing a broken heart as Ridge repeatedly returned to the chaotic, intoxicating fire of Brooke Logan. She had endured the subtle manipulations, the blatant disrespect, and the painful reality of always being the alternative choice. But now, seeing the absolute sincerity and the deep, weary truth in Ridge's eyes, Taylor realized that this time was fundamentally different. Ridge was not running to her out of a temporary misunderstanding with Brooke. He was running to her because he had fundamentally rejected everything Brooke stood for. The plotting and scheming of outside forces, the lingering threats of Sheila Carter, none of it mattered in this transcendent moment. Tears of pure, unadulterated happiness streamed down Taylor's face as she accepted his proposal, pulling him into an embrace that felt like the closing of a painful chapter and the dawn of a magnificent new era. Almost immediately, the couple began preparing for a secret, intimate wedding right there in the breathtaking splendor of Monaco. They wanted to seal their commitment before the inevitable storm of Los Angeles could reach their shores. The preparations were swift but elegant.